Setting sail on a cruise with Princess is the perfect way to see Canada and New England. A journey that takes you from charming seaside towns and lighthouses to the birthplace of the American Revolution. Explore the region's history, natural wonders, and world-renowned seafood, both on board and off. From Old Quebec City to Peggy's Cove and Halifax, to vistas of hillsides covered in multicolored fall foliage, to strolling in the footsteps of the Founding Fathers along Boston's Freedom Trail. It all awaits you aboard a Princess Cruise, the #1 cruise line in Canada and New England.
You wake up to the gentle sounds of water breaking from the sea below and step out onto your balcony in your PJs. You spot a lush patch of islands getting closer in the distance, lined with little pops of color in the vibrant fishing villages that dot the coast. You take in the fresh, salty Atlantic Ocean air. You get dressed and head to the upper deck for your made-to-order breakfast, wondering how you'll possibly narrow it down. So many options. A delicious French omelet, crispy potatoes, fresh sliced fruit, and the rich scent of hot coffee await you. Paired with that unique view, it's already turning into the perfect day. As your ship slides into port, you feel a wave of excitement. You're about to discover the hidden treasures of the Canadian Maritimes off the east coast of Canada. My guest today is Ilana Schattauer, creator of the blog Life Well Cruised. Since her first cruise back in 2004, she's been hooked on the high seas, romanced by the rolling waves, and enchanted by the elegance of cruise vacations. She's here to tell us about the joy of cruising the Canadian Maritimes and New England, and, of course, the one-of-a-kind flavors that await. Welcome back, everyone, to another exciting episode of Traveling with AAA. Today, we're diving into the serene and picturesque world of cruising through the Canadian Maritimes. Joining us to shed light on this delightful journey is none other than Ilana Schattauer, a seasoned cruise expert with an incredibly informative YouTube channel. Welcome to the podcast, Ilana. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Angie.
This is going to be a very exciting conversation. I will say that I've been on many cruises in my day and never to the Canadian Maritimes. So I'm really excited to get your perspective, as this is one spot that I have really been wanting to go. So what geographical part of the world are we talking about when we're talking about the Canadian Maritime provinces?
So we're really talking about Eastern Canada, and it really is the area between, let's say, Montreal and Quebec City. A lot of people might think of it that way, but as well as the Maritime provinces. So you have provinces like Nova Scotia, you have New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and it's such a beautiful part of the world. I do think that even myself as a Canadian, it's an area I hadn't really discovered and explored until I was like already 50 years old. I definitely regret not going earlier. It's such a beautiful part of the world, and probably it's underrated.
And so when people are booking these kind of itineraries, what's their main port?
Oftentimes for Canada and New England cruises, because usually they're sort of grouped together, this cruise would leave either from New York City and it would do round trip back to New York City. So you'd have those Canadian Maritime provinces, usually coupled with maybe Maine, like Portland, for instance, or Bar Harbor as an example, or even Newport, Rhode Island. So you'd have that. Or another very popular itinerary is leaving from Boston in the US and making your way over to Quebec City. And alternatively, sometimes Boston to Montreal, but less ships do that route.
Tell us about your first cruise in this region. You said you were 50. You'd probably done other cruises before then. What made you finally take it, and what was it like?
We had done about 30 cruises before we had been on that one. And it was not long after the pandemic. And we just really wanted to do a cruise in early fall. And to be honest, we just wanted something that was a little bit simple. We didn't want to have to fly. And this was a region we did want to go to, especially in my audience. A lot of people were asking us about Canada, New England. We'd never been, so we decided to do it. And that was a beautiful itinerary. It was 10 days on a Norwegian Cruise Line ship. And we were able to leave from New York City. We were able to see 4 maritime provinces and 2 US ports. So it was just perfect having 6 port days, 4 sea days made for a relaxing cruise. And we fell in love with the region. The year after that, we did another Canada, New England cruise, and this time from Boston to Quebec City, which was perfect because we got some extra time to explore Quebec City, which is wonderful. And we are going to be taking another Canada, New England cruise this fall, actually, with my parents. We're going to be bringing them along. My father was actually born in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and he is now 80 years old. He has never returned, and it had always been a bit of a dream of my parents to go. So we are bringing them on a cruise in late summer, and we're going to be going. They're very excited, and so are we.
That's really exciting. That's going to be a big day for him. I imagine getting off in port and seeing how things have changed. So you said your first time cruising in the Canadian Maritimes, you said it was early fall. How was the weather then? And is that a good time to go for people, or do you recommend a different time?
Our first cruise to Canada, New England, I think it was September 6th. In any case, early September. And we chose that date because I do not like to be cold. And one of the reasons I didn't really cruise to that region before was because, I have that weather right in my backyard and I always wanted to go somewhere warmer. So we did that early September, and it was just beautiful because it was mild enough, like let's say high 60s, low 70s. We had really beautiful weather, very little rain. So that was quite nice. But we did do the end of September the year after, where we had a greater chance of seeing those fall leaves. And that was also nice. I did wear a little bit of a light sweater rather than that late summer clothing, but it was still beautiful. I think the thing with that region is that in the fall, you can get a little bit of damp weather, a little bit of rain. But I think now that we've done it, I don't think that it sours the experience. You just have to be dressed for it.
When you're doing this Canadian Maritimes itinerary, what are people seeing? Is it more architecture and cities? Is it whale watching? Tell me everything.
Each port of call or province really does have its own personality. So when you go to Halifax, you actually sail right into a pretty large waterfront area that's fairly well developed. You have little restaurants, little shops. It is very, very pretty. Boat tours that you can take right from that area. But at the same time, even though you're coming right into what is a small city of Halifax, about 45 minutes away, you do have Peggy's Cove, which of course historically is so interesting. So that is one area that is just beautiful. We had a wonderful time when we were at Peggy's Cove. We went for lobster. We visited Peggy's Cove. And one of the nice things too about Peggy's Cove is a couple of years ago, they made the area, which just has these immense large rocks that you can walk on, but they did make it accessible to people as well by putting a nice pathway that people that might be in a wheelchair or anything like that, that it is more solid. So that was something really nice in Halifax. In Charlottetown, PEI, which is Prince Edward Island, it has a completely different landscape. The greenery is just so beautiful. I think that we were told they have more shades of green, they told us, than Ireland. I'm not sure that that's true, but it was definitely incredibly beautiful. And the beaches and all of the earth around the water, it's a red earth. So the landscape of that striking red earth against the greenery is beautiful. And for people that are Anne of Green Gables fans, enthusiasts, there's an Anne of Green Gables museum that is really, really so picturesque, so nice. You can visit like the Anne of Green Gables house, and there's all of that history there. The food is also fabulous. And overall, just a coastal type of architecture in many, many places. So very pretty.
Do you want to tell us about Sydney, Nova Scotia? Tell us what somebody would do on a day in Sydney.
Sydney, Nova Scotia is famous for more than one thing, but one of the things that you're going to find when you get right off the cruise ship in Sydney, Nova Scotia, is you're going to find the largest fiddle in the world. I think that that's what they say. So it is a very large fiddle. It becomes a great photo op. But besides that, there are some different excursions that you might want to do. in Sydney, Nova Scotia. Now, one of those excursions is visiting the Alexander Graham Bell Museum. So actually, for history buffs, this is very, very interesting. This is the home where Alexander Graham Bell and his family lived for many, many years. That is in the town of Baddock. So after visiting the Alexander Graham Bell Museum, you could walk along the little waterfront, go into some of the shops in the town of Baddock. It's very, very pretty. And the other thing that you can do while you're in Sydney, Nova Scotia, is visit the Fortress of Louisbourg. So also something very interesting for history buffs.
And now for the AAA Travel Minute, brought to you by Princess Cruises. Frequent flyers might want to consider one of 2 government-run trusted traveler programs that can take the hassle out of airport security screenings. For both TSA PreCheck and Global Entry, federal agencies run background checks on applicants and issue known traveler numbers to those who are deemed low risk. Domestic travelers with TSA PreCheck get to use shorter lines at checkpoints, keep their shoes on, and leave liquids and electronics in their bags at more than 200 U.S. airports. It costs $78 and is valid for 5 years. Global Entry comes with all those perks. Plus, it allows international travelers to bypass the usual passport control lines when they re-enter the U.S. It costs $100. Like TSA PreCheck, Global Entry privileges are valid for 5 years before you need to renew. Application processing times for Global Entry can be significant. Once pre-approved, Globetrotters can interview at enrollment centers around the U.S. or at dozens of airports when they re-enter the U.S. Let's talk about the food a little bit, because I imagine the food is incredible around here as far as seafood and local goodnesses. Was there a dining experience that you've had on board in this destination that sort of brought in the local food?
Especially now, more and more cruise lines are bringing regional specialties onto the ship, or even port-to-table fish dishes, so that they're really locally sourcing the fish and serving it from port to table within 48 hours in some cases. So that's really nice. I have to say, when we were on board, what we really tried to do, though, is get off during the day, do a tour as an example, but spend time and go to a local restaurant or somewhere that, the locals were going. And we really appreciated that. So for instance, when we were in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, we went to a little place that was recommended, had fish and chips, and my son had this giant lobster that was extremely reasonably priced as well, but very delicious. And of course, the lobster rolls in some of the places too.
You said Portland, Maine, and I instantly flashed to all the lobster rolls I ate when I went there. And yes, if that's the one thing I take from this conversation, it's that I need to go eat lobster in the Canadian Maritimes, because that's my favorite food.
There's another food that's more of a local food, but I don't know if it's as much in the Maritimes, but definitely something that you'll find in Quebec City and Montreal, but that is poutine. And poutine is French fries, and the more like homemade the French fry is, the better. That is made with French fries and a sort of gravy and a curd cheese. But we were in Saguenay, Quebec, and we did a tour, and it was so much fun, the tour. But one of the parts of the tour was we actually went to the cheese factory where they made that famous curd cheese that is very popular in Quebec. It's not something you want to eat all the time, but it is very delicious.
It is delicious. I forgot about poutine. So now there's 2 things that are on my Canadian Maritime bucket list: lobster and poutine. See, that's enough. That's enough for me, really. I'm convinced. I'm sold. So for people like me who are maybe more familiar with cruising in the Caribbean or even Alaska, how different is this for them? Is it going to be a real culture shock? Is it going to be different in the way that programming is done on board? What's different?
That's such a good question. So I think for people that are already used to cruising, it's going to feel very much the same, except that it's going to have a little bit less of that party vibe that the Caribbean has. So similar to how in Alaska, the cruises don't feel as much of a party. They're a little bit more enrichment focused. The same thing is true of the Canada New England, but there are still shows at night. The dining is still amazing. The service is still great, but I do think that the demographic skews a little bit older. And people are interested in really exploring the regions more than being on a ship and, experiencing every water slide on board. So it's that little bit of a difference.
What would you say the Canadian maritime provinces are best known for as far as it goes with cruising?
It is a very safe, but also very friendly, authentic people. I can't think of places we've been in the world where people have been as genuinely nice. Everybody from tour guides. So when you're on a tour bus and you're going over to Peggy's Cove, for instance, and people are very proud and happy to share their heritage. So I think that's something really nice. When we were in also Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, we had our tour guide who on the bus played us some of his harmonica songs. That was definitely unique, but the people are very friendly. And then at the same time, the coastline is just so beautiful. So you have this rocky coastline, sometimes cliffs even. It's beautiful. And you just get to see also as you're sailing, especially as you're leaving many of the different ports, you see lighthouses. It really is very picturesque. There are some areas along the St. Lawrence Seaway where you'll see the Thousand Islands. And it really is something, if you have balcony cabin, you just sit out there and just take it all in as the sun is setting. It's really very beautiful.
You paint such a vivid picture, and I'm thinking of the lighthouses and the waves crashing. It sounds lovely. If you had to pick one time of year to suggest somebody go on their first cruise in this area, what would you suggest?
I would say fall. Typically, most of the cruises that are going to go to that region are going to go in the fall, simply because so many people do really want to see the fall leaves. I have fall leaves in my own backyard. I live in the Montreal area, so I already have them. So that has less of an appeal to me, but definitely the end of September, early October, if you really want to see those gorgeous fall leaves, that is the time. However, really, there is no bad time to see this region. There are cruises that do Canada, New England through the summer months. And even going in July is a great time. For instance, if people are stopping in Montreal, there are some cruises that will do Boston and they will end in Montreal. Montreal is an incredible city, and people can get right off the cruise ship and walk into the old port or Vieux-Port, and the roads are cobblestone roads, and they can walk right over to the Notre Dame Cathedral. They can stop in and have some poutine, listen to some of the musicians on the street. And Montreal and even Quebec City are very festive in the summer, so that's definitely something to enjoy. But if I had to really choose, I would say for a lot of people, it's going to be September, October.
Yeah, and I imagine the leaves start changing that far north pretty early in September. Is that right?
The weather in this region can change from year to year. So when we visited, our cruise was September 29th. That was last year. And we expected to see fall leaves. And we did have, as we headed, like you mentioned, further north, we did have more fall leaves, but not so much in some of the maritime provinces. It just happened to be a warmer year. But other years, you would definitely have the fall leaves by then.
Either way, you'll have a good time because the food is good and the people are nice, right?
Absolutely. And the landscape is still beautiful. So whether the leaves are very red or, they're still green with a little bit of yellow, it is still absolutely beautiful. There's no bad time to go.
Do you think, in your experience of doing this, is it better to do sort of a round trip loop, either out of New York or Boston, or I don't know if they port in Montreal? Or is it better to start in one place and stop in another?
Both are good. I think for convenience, for a lot of people, the New York route might be the most convenient, because if you are flying from somewhere else, you're flying into one place, then you're taking your cruise, and maybe you spend a day or two in New York to extend the trip. And that's definitely a convenient way. However, there is something really nice about starting in Quebec City, for instance, and going to Boston, or going from Boston to Quebec. And you can usually do one or two extra ports that way. So for somebody who wants to see more of the land, get off the ship a little bit more, I think that might be the better option, because you do have more days in port, a little bit less sea days than you would have if you're leaving from New York.
You talked about Peggy's Cove, which is in Halifax, and you mentioned the Anne of Green Gables Museum in PEI, which would be amazing if you're a literature buff or a book girly like I am. So tell us about some of the other highlights in the region, some of the highlights people can expect to see.
We had gone to St. John's, New Brunswick. And if anybody knows about the Bay of Fundy and the highest tides in the world, that is just an incredible place to see. So in St. John's, New Brunswick, you can go and you can do an excursion that will bring you over to Hopewell Rocks, and you can actually walk on the ocean floor. So when we arrived in Hopewell Rocks, which was a little bit of a ways away from the cruise port, but we really wanted to go, the ocean floor was not visible. There was at least probably 20 feet of ocean. And we arrived, we were able to take a look, have some lunch, have, some information, walk around the beautiful area. And then we were able to go down, and about an hour and a half later, we were able to walk on the ocean floor, which was just incredible, right around the Hopewell Rocks. And that's just for a very short time that you have that opportunity. So that was something very interesting as well.
Tell me about Old Quebec City, because that's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and I'm guessing there are a lot of excursions to there in that port.
Absolutely. So in Quebec City, well, there are a couple of things that people can do. So you can walk right off the cruise ship, and you could walk from Lower Quebec up to the Upper Quebec portion, and you can visit Chateau Frontenac, which is one of the most famous, now it's a hotel, in the world, but it is absolutely incredible. It's very tourist friendly in Quebec. So although people speak French and it is a French city and it is a French province, people that are from America or elsewhere can feel comfortable that people are going to be very friendly. And if you're eating at a restaurant, people understand English and you can speak English. So that's not a problem. The food is absolutely wonderful in Quebec. It's definitely a foodie city. But outside of Quebec City, you can actually go and visit something that is called Chute Montmorency or Montmorency Falls. And this is about 45 minutes outside of the city. But these falls are just incredible. You can take a gondola up to the top of them, and it really is just so beautiful. So either to stay in Quebec City, walk around on your own, or you can take a bus tour around. You can even go and walk on the plains of Abraham and really see that walled city, walk underneath the outer area of the walls and through. It's really just something to see and experience. And it really does, I know people say it, but it really does feel like Europe. It definitely has that vibe.
It's a good way to get that European feel without having to fly across the Atlantic, right?
Absolutely. And I think also for people that are American, something to know is when you go to Canada, you are going to be paying in Canadian dollars. So your dollar does go a little bit further.
Well, that's always nice to know when you're splashing out on a vacation. So get the balcony, go for it, because it's going to be so much better when you get there and you're spending on souvenirs and excursions, right? Because of that exchange rate.
Exactly. Well, when you're booking through the cruise line, you're still going to be paying in your regular currency. But when you do stop in the different ports of call, if you go to a restaurant, it's going to be in Canadian dollars. And therefore, it does end up being a lot more affordable for our American friends and people from elsewhere.
Do you think that cruising is the best way to experience sort of this region versus, I don't know, flying in and renting a car and driving around?
Absolutely. Look, places are far apart and Canada's very vast. So it would take hours and hours and hours to go from one place to the other. So it does make it so much easier. You get back on the cruise ship, have dinner, watch a show, maybe go to a bar, talk to friends, go to bed, and the next morning you wake up and you're in another destination. So you still get all of the hours to explore in the cruise ports of call, in those beautiful cities in Canada. But after that, you can get right back on the cruise ship and you can enjoy everything that cruising has to offer.
In just a different kind of destination with all the coastal comforts and lighthouses and lobster.
The benefit of cruising versus, let's say, taking a bus tour or driving is the fact that you get into your cabin, you unpack only once during that trip. So that is definitely a plus.
Isn't that the best? And you're not putting your suitcase in and out of the car. You're just like on a mission and somebody else is driving you through the night to the next beautiful port. Ilana Schattauer, thank you for joining us, and thank you, our listeners, for being with us. If you're planning a trip, be sure to connect with a AAA travel advisor. Check out AAA.com/travel or visit your local branch. This podcast is a production of Auto Club Enterprises. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave us a review. I'm Angie Orth. Thank you for traveling with AAA.